Well, that seems like something of a loaded question, doesn't it? But I think we can all agree our legal system is in desperate need of some renovating. And in the aftermath of the 2024 election, I've started thinking about what I would do were I elected president, assuming I was also given carte blanche to rejigger the system in whatsoever ways I saw fit. So, what changes would I make? Well, in the last video, I'd meant to say that the cure for game theory is open and honest communication, though this somehow didn't make it into the final edit. For those who don't know, the essential core of that model is the saying, better safe than sorry. Better to assume the worst and be proven right than to assume the best and be proven wrong. Basically, if I'm out in the jungle and I see rustling off in the bushes, the safer option is to assume it's a lion rather than to go, must have been the wind. Likewise, if I'm surrounded by a bunch of people I don't know and or can't communicate with, it is in my own best interest to assume they're all a bunch of evil, narcissistic scumbags who'll stab me in the back at their earliest convenience, because sooner or later, by statistical probability alone, I'll be right. And as humans are far better at predicting than we are at reacting to things, the last thing I want is to be caught flat-footed when that happens. The problem this presents for us on a societal level is that our courts are supposed to work on a presumption of innocence. But if we don't know them, and the potential of being wrong is to release a violent criminal back into our midst, then our animal intuition tells us to do the opposite. And given that those instincts are there to keep us alive, rather than dispense with them in favor of some rationalist utopian idea of justice, I propose that we instead make our criminal trials double-blind, meaning that at no point before or during the trial should either the judge or the jury have any information about the defendant beyond the evidence of their supposed misdeeds presented by the prosecution, and only the judge should know what crimes the defendant is being accused of. Now, here's the best part. To prevent the prosecution from abusing this to bring bullshit cases, as they're currently wont to do, should a defendant be found innocent, they shall be treated as false accusers and be sentenced to the same as would have the defendant had they been found guilty. So, for instance, if a prosecutor brings a charge that carries a 5-year prison sentence, if they fail to convict, they'll be sentenced to 5 years in prison. This would also work to hopefully cut down on the amount of lawfare and charge stacking that plagues our quote-unquote justice system. Basically, I imagine a trial working this way. A crime is initially reported to the police in the form of a who, what, when, and where statement. The police, who in my version function only as licensed bounty hunters to go out and capture suspects for trial, then send copies of that statement to both the prosecution and the defense attorney's offices, which would be separate branches of the same legal appendage that should have exactly zero contact outside of the courtroom. These then would each send out private investigators to gather evidence, interview witnesses, etc. The aim of the one being to prove the initial statement true, the others to prove it false. Should the prosecution gather sufficient evidence to prove their side, they would then present that information to a court-martial, who would then issue a warrant of arrest to the cops, and upon capture of the suspect, provide the evidence file and initial statement, with the who part redacted, to the judge, who would then issue summons to a random party of 12 jurors from the general population. Now it's the task of the prosecution and defense to compose a narrative using no proper nouns of what happened and to counterpose their opponent's narrative. Basically, tell a story and present supporting evidence, then poke holes in the opponent's story using counter-evidence. Meanwhile, the judge essentially acts as the tone police, striking down any language that's not purely factual. For example, in the statement, person A maliciously approached person B, the word maliciously would be struck out as disingenuous because subjective intentions aren't falsifiable. Now, with all that in hand, once they get their story straight, over the course of 3 separate rounds of debate, the jury has to independently decide who in the described scenario is the party A, the victim, how specifically they were harmed. There's no such thing as a victimless crime in my system. Who is the party B, the criminal, and what specific wrongs they committed. If on any one of these 3 occasions the jury's assessment does not match the initial statement the judge received, the trial is declared void and the prosecution immediately receives their sentence. The foundational idea of this system is to pit every aspect of the state apparatus against itself, rather than to have them united as a common plight upon the citizenry. And to that same end, using my powers as temporary dictator, I would also declare null and void the absurd legal fiction that corporations are people. As well, I declare there to be no such thing as corporate or business actions. All actions and/or decisions are to be attributed to the individual human being that signed off on them and to be treated to the according legal standards thus applied in a general setting. Translated to common English, if a corporate executive signs off on something they know could cause grievous harm to others, or has the power to veto such action and does not, they will be held criminally responsible. And in a double-blind setting, all their money and connections would win them no advantage. And you know what? As long as we're wishing for the impossible, one final edit I'd throw in the mix for good measure is a few minor amendments to our current marriage contract. You see, feminists are objectively correct about exactly one thing. For the majority of our history on this planet, men have had more leverage, more bargaining power in marriage, and in relationships in general, because women literally couldn't survive without them. However, thanks to the invention of hormonal birth control and the advent of women's mass participation in the workforce, the inherent advantage is lessened so that the old marriage contract becomes less an agent of balance than an unfair additional weight upon the man's shoulders. So here's my proposal to correct this imbalance. Number 1. Marriage is automatically instigated upon birth of a couple's first child and lasts only until their last achieves legal adult status. If you don't want to be stuck with someone for the next 18 to 30 years, assuming 1 to 4 kids over the same number of years, don't have babies with them. Number 2. A man whose wife refuses to engage with him sexually or who is caught sexually engaging with another man may sue her for contract violation. If she is unable to pay and unwilling to concede, the contract is voided immediately, and the man shall assume full custody of his children. Number 3. Outright abolish the concepts of alimony and child support. Number 4. Mandatory paternity tests at birth. No exceptions. And the father must be informed at the hospital and must acknowledge himself as having been so in writing before being permitted to leave. Number 5. Any man found not to be the biological father of a child may immediately exempt himself from all marital and parental duties and obligations henceforth. Number 6. A man may engage sexually outside of marriage, so long as it does not result in pregnancy, and so long as he continues to meet his marital and parental duties and obligations, and so long as his extramarital partner is not herself married. And number 7. Should a man's extramarital affair result in pregnancy, he will be automatically required to assume full legal custody. Well, that ought to be enough controversy to satiate the algorithm gods for another week. Hopefully. In any event, let me know your thoughts down in the usual place. And while you're there, consider checking out my books, liking and/or subscribing or becoming a channel member. And until next time, stay safe, stay sane, and remember, it is better to live alone and in squalor than to share satin pillows with a viper. Peace.